Okay, guys, I thought I would post a video going over the slides in case people miss a discussion in class or want to review. So this week we're going over natural selection. So remember, this topic is just me talking about what we know from the science and not anything else. Your own personal beliefs are your own personal beliefs, and you are free to those. So I'll just be talking about what we know about natural selection and who invented it or who thought of it and things like that. So when we first look at natural selection, the first thing we have to understand are what genetic traits are. So genetic traits are your characteristics that make you unique. And these are things you get from mom and dad and grandparents and things like that. So these are traits that make you unique and are found in what's called a genetic code. So it's like a computer code. So that computer code reads whatever you type into that code, and that's what it does. So your cells have this DNA information, and it's in your body goes through and reads that information, and then it produces, what color of hair you have, what color of eyes you have, how tall you are, whatever it is, and that's what makes you unique. But we get different combinations of this code from our parents. That's why we don't all look exactly the same. So if you look at these four adorable puppies here, we've got one that's all black fur, one that's a light brown fur, one's a dark brown, and one's kind of like a mix between the two. So these are all from the same litter. They have the same mom and dad, but they got different combinations of that genetic code. So therefore they look different, right? And genetic codes are found in plants and animals. So that's something we're going to see later on as well. So the idea of natural selection came from this guy, Charles Darwin. He was born into a wealthy family in the 1800s, and he kind of bounced around for a couple of different careers. So he had 16, he went to medical school. And then a couple of years after that, he dropped out. He didn't like it as much as he thought he would. And then he went to study to become a minister, and then he eventually left that as well. And so he reached his early 20s going, well, gee, what do I do with my life? So he decided to book a trip for several years on a ship called the HMS Beagle. And he went down to the Galapagos Islands, and he studied all the different plants and animals down there that most people hadn't really paid a whole lot of attention to. He was hired as a ship's biologist, so his main job was to go down there and with his notebooks where he took drawings and written notes and things like that, and he just recorded everything he saw and his observations. And eventually he compiled all these ideas into a book called On the Origin of Species, and he published it. Well, this book is controversial now, it was controversial when it was published, because people, for some reason, just don't like the idea of natural selection. I can't tell you specifically, why everybody likes or doesn't like it, but natural selection is basically the fundamental idea in biology. So you're going to hear it again and again and again throughout your science careers. So basically, the idea of natural selection is that a species is going to adapt to its new surroundings to be a best fit. And the ones that are the most adapted and the most proficient in their environment are going to be the ones that pass on those genes, that DNA, and those genes survive. So those are going to be the ones that are the quote unquote the strongest. So, but the key here is they have to be responsive to change. And typically that change comes through what's called a genetic mutation. And these genetic mutations help fuel these different adaptations. So if you look at this picture here, you can see there's different adaptations for each of these little animals. We all know the classic duck here. If you go down to like a pond or something, you're bound to run into lots of different ducks. And if you just take a look at them, you may not think of anything extraordinary about this duck, but look at their feet. Their feet have webbed toes, basically. So that is a great resource if they are trying to swim very fast, maybe to catch a fish or a bug or escape a predator. That's an important adaptation for that duck. Now, obviously, web feet are not common in all species. So if you look at the cheetah here, the cheetah is designed for running. They obviously live in a very different environment than the duck. They live in the African savanna, and they do not have web feet. I can't imagine a cheetah with web feet, to be honest with you. It would be kind of silly looking. But these animals don't have web feet, so they have a different type of foot, which allows them to have speed on land and allows them to chase prey. And then if you look at the pufferfish, he's got an adaptation where he's poisonous. And so and he's got those spines, so that deters things from eating him. It's a very good way to survive if things can't or don't want to eat you, because you are known to be toxic and or pointy. So some adaptations are more obvious than others, but they all result as a end result of a genetic mutation of some kind. So an adaptation is animal's way of basically fitting into its environment so it does better, but it's not going to happen overnight. So like this duck was not born without web feet, and then 2 days later it's like, web feet, oh, I'm successful. No, it's happened over multiple generations. So natural selection is a very long process, and it's been going on for as long as life has been around on Earth. So it's not something like you're not going to wake up tomorrow with webbed toes or anything like that, so don't worry. But yes, even humans have gone through a bit of a natural selection process as we have changed over time and, walked more upright and got bigger brains and larger skulls and things like that. So most organisms go through natural selection. So remember, an organism is anything from a tiny bacteria cell like this to an arachnid to a mammal or a reptile. It could be anything that's alive, basically. And you guys watched the bacteria video the other day about how they change in response to different levels of antibiotics. So we'll talk more about that soon. But so you can see even the bacteria can respond to their environment. That's why bacteria are so successful and so prolific in our world. So just a reminder, an environment is the surroundings or conditions where the animal or plant is most adapted to, and it's the happiest. So your environment right now, wherever you're watching this, could be your apartment, your house, whatever. It's wherever you are most comfortable. So like this picture looks like a rainforest. So you wouldn't put a cheetah in the rainforest. It would not be a happy cat. So every animal is adapted to their environment. So the main goal of natural selection is being able to survive long enough to pass on your genes. And to be able to survive long enough in the world of nature, you sometimes have to use tactics to avoid predators, or to, you have to be able to have food all the time, because everybody needs food. That's kind of a key point of being able to survive, is eating. So in the case of this bunny rabbit here, if you were to just glance quickly at the screen, like you didn't know there wasn't a little thought bubble there, you might not see the bunny rabbit. He might blend in, and that's the goal here. He has all white fur, and he is sitting in a snowy, tundra or something like that. And he is blending in with his surroundings, which is an adaptation for survival. It helps him escape what's called predation, or being picked off by a circling bird of prey. So this adaptation, this white fur, is his adaptation that allows him to survive. I'm sure that white fur is also really thick, which is also a way to survive in a cold climate. So it's kind of a twofer adaptation. So if you were to go to this same snowy place, wherever it is, and you were to drop a gray bunny rabbit or a brown bunny rabbit off, they would not have as good a chance of surviving because they have fur that sticks out in the snow. So this white fur occurred because of a genetic mutation at some point. So If this rabbit species has always lived in this snowy environment, then this at one point that genetic mutation would have happened, and the bunny rabbits with white fur would have been more successful and survived, whereas the bunny rabbits with darker fur would have been probably somebody's lunch. So they would not have passed on their genes, and therefore eventually you get a mostly white furred population of rabbits. And they survive because they blend in with the snow, and the hawks or whatever can't see them from the sky, and they can, be stealth ninjas or whatever. So this is considered a favorable trait. It allows them to survive and pass on their genes. And this happens, if it's happened many, many, many times, that's when it's considered a favorable trait. One time is, like an anomaly, but if it proves successful, then it becomes a favorable trait. And something similar has happened in the past with polar bears. So polar bears and brown bears used to be part of the same species. Nowadays, they're very distinct species, but in the past, they were not. So they, in the case of the bunny rabbit, the white fur helps them escape predation. In the polar bear, white fur against a snowy background helps them be a better predator. Because if you are a seal minding your own business in the Arctic, and a polar bear is stalking you, you may not realize it because that polar bear is blending in with the snow. Now, if a brown bear were to be up in the Arctic stalking that same seal would notice and, we kind of look at that bear and go, no, I'm out, and flee, and therefore the brown bear would not have food. So there's a chance of passing on their genes because they aren't eating, they aren't surviving efficiently. So the adaptations can be for being a predator or escaping a predator, just really depends. But the main goal here, like I said, is to survive. And so Darwin noticed this when he was looking at the Galapagos Islands population. And one thing he noticed in particular was the finch. It's a type of bird, kind of like you see on your screen here. So this bird, Darwin noticed there was at least 13 distinct species, but they all looked somewhat similar. So because of this, he hypothesized that they had to have a common ancestor. And this is another key trait of natural selection, is that common ancestor. So he noticed that they all looked similar, but they all had specialized beaks, their mouths basically. And these beaks were different because they allowed the different types of finches to eat different diets. So if you have a finch or a bunch of finches and they all eat the exact same thing, you're actually going to have a limited population size because you're going to run out of natural resources to feed that population. But if you have varied diets and varied beaks, so some beaks were larger to allow for like crushing large nuts and seeds, some are smaller for like insects and small seeds. If you have these varied beaks and varied diets, you're going to have a more diverse and larger population of these birds, which is what Darwin saw. So he noticed they had a common ancestor at some point back in the line of finches, but they had adapted to these different diets, which allowed them to be more successful. And that's why there was more. So here's some examples of different beaks. If you've never been super close to birds, maybe you haven't really noticed their beak shapes, but they all are actually designed for different eating styles, basically. So this is like a bird of prey that would go after our friend the bunny rabbit from a couple slides ago. He's got a hooked beak here that's good for ripping meat. He looks like he's got a business in there. You don't want to come across that. This here is similar to like a finch's beak. It's very powerful, and it can crush really large seeds or seed pods, large nuts, things like that. So this finch would eat things that are harder to crack open. This bird up here would eat like insects and small seeds, things like that, because it's got a pointed, narrow beak that could get into like little parts of trees, the little holes, and it could go after insects. And then of course you got the duck here. The duck is good for, it's a fringed bill, and it strains out plants and seeds and things like that from the mud and the muck and the water where it lives. So again, each of these beaks are adapted to their specific diets and their specific environments. Because not all birds look the same, right? If you look at any pictures on Google, you will notice that birds look very different. And speaking of birds that look very different, here's our friend the peacock. So in this case, the peacock is not trying to blend in. The peacock is trying to stand out. And that is because in bird world, the males are typically very bright colored. They have large feathers. They put on shows. They put together little gifts for the females they're trying to woo. And in the case of the peacock, he is very in your face. If you've heard a peacock scream, it's very noticeable. And so that he's just very showy and flamboyant. He's like, look at me, I'm beautiful. And that is actually an adaptation. He has adapted to be bigger and brighter and more flashy because that gets him more females. And therefore he passes on his genetics more. So you don't really see muted male peacocks or dull male peacocks anymore. They're very flashy. And so that's an adaptation that helps him pass on his genes. Now, in terms of predation, I don't think being blue and bright green and screaming at the top of your lungs is going to be in your best interest, but to each his own. Now, so natural selection occurs naturally, hence the name, but humans can influence certain factors, in which case we call that selective breeding. So we have been selectively picking out our plants and our canine companions for thousands of years. So in terms of selective breeding for dogs, this is how we got all the different dog species we have today. So at some point, wolves in the past joined up with humans. We either domesticated them or they domesticated us, depends on which way you look at it. Either way, it was a beneficial relationship. They got food on a more regular basis from the humans, and the humans got protection from whatever scary thing was in the area. So eventually the humans started picking out characteristics they liked the most in their dogs, be it sociability, guard dog technique, like are they defensive, fur color, things like that. So they decided to start crossbreeding dogs with characteristics they liked. So in the example of poodles that we have here on the screen, somebody at some point decided the poodle is great, but I wish I could fit it in my purse. And so they wanted a teacup poodle. They wanted a small poodle, because if you've ever been next to a poodle, they are pretty tall. They're very large dogs. And they don't fit into an average purse. I'll just tell you that right now. So they took, let's say, these 4 dogs right here that are got a halo behind them. These 4 dogs have various characteristics. You got different types of fur, different ear shapes, different colors of fur, different tails. And so they crossbred those, and you get generation 2, where they have a little bit smaller size, again, some different ears and tails and furs configurations. And again, they just did this for multiple generations until they get to the teacup poodle, which has the desired characteristics that they want. So, being smaller, maybe they want certain ears, like this one has smaller ears, or whatever characteristics they were looking for. So this happens over multiple generations, and it's happened for a long, long time. So all of the different breeds of dogs we have today are the result of this selective breeding. So we don't just selectively pick out our dogs, we also selectively pick out our fruits and vegetables. And we've actually been doing this long before we had labs and high-tech technology and all that. Because once humans invented agriculture, they started doing this. They started picking out plants that grew the best in certain areas at certain times of the year, just like farmers do today. So if you were to look at these pictures, and if they were not labeled, I don't know about you, but this does not look like a watermelon to me, because the watermelons today have different looking seeds, and they have that distinctive red color with the green outside, and this does not look like a watermelon. If you were to just show me this picture on the street and say, what is this? I would say some sort of weird lemon. But it's actually watermelon from before. So over time, humans have picked watermelons and cross-fertilized them with other watermelons or other plants, and they have produced the plants we have today. So like if you look at this picture, this is the original banana. As you can see, it's full of seeds. The bananas you find at the grocery store today are not going to be full of seeds. In fact, they don't have seeds at all. So I don't know personally how I would eat this banana. That looks like an obstacle. And then if you look at, this is a corn from thousands of years ago. This is an original carrot. So we have picked out traits in our vegetables over time to make them more brightly colored, or different tasting, or growing quicker, or growing in different climates, things like that, so that we can have a more robust agricultural system. So this leads to something, a term that can be kind of scary to some people if you don't know what it is. And that is called genetically modified organisms, or a GMO. A lot of, food labels and news sources and things like that today will be like anti-GMO, no GMOs, whatever. All a GMO is, it's just something that humans have tweaked. Either through, because like a GMO could even be something that humans have figured out how to plant better or something like that over time. You don't have to have a big fancy lab to have a GMO. Now, because we have fancy labs nowadays in food technology and things like that, they are tweaking some parts of some crops, but it's not to harm humans. It's actually to make our lives a little better. So in the case of corn, before to grow your corn crop, you probably had to douse your corn crop in tons and tons of pesticide. It's a poison. You don't want to eat that. And what happened is that the insects started adapting to the pesticide. So you had to keep dumping more and more pesticide on the corn, and that is labor intensive, it's expensive, and it comes with the risk of, if you don't wash off all the pesticide before you eat the corn, you could get sick. So that is a problem. So they have developed corn in the lab that actually naturally repels insects. So the insects don't want to eat it. Therefore, the farmers can actually have a yield of crop at the end of the growing season, which is, ideal. So that is beneficial to them. It saves them money, it saves them time, it saves them frustration. There's also instances where you can put some extra vitamins in rice, because rice is a staple in a lot of people's diets. But in some countries of the world where there's not as good of a, growing season, or maybe they're a poorer country, and so they need this rice, well, they also need those vitamins. So this vitamin-enriched rice will actually help that population stay healthy and be better, because they will have an extra nutrients they need, and they're still getting food. So it can be kind of scary when you first think about it, but genetically modified organisms are something we've been tweaking for thousands of years. We just didn't always have the lab and the lab coat to go with it. So it's not designed to hurt humans. It's perfectly safe. These are just things you can also, they've also worked with plants to get them to produce bigger tomatoes, more tomatoes, or because of the climate crisis we're experiencing, certain areas of the world are going to have shorter growing seasons because of less water, or different extra heat, different environments. So the plants may not do as well. So if we can use our lab science, we can intercede and still have plants that grow in a drought, which is something we all really need, because if we get enough areas on Earth that experience drought for prolonged periods of time, because of climate change, we're going to have a global crisis on our hands for hunger, and that's not something we need. So it's a way to be beneficial in the future, so that we don't have a whole bunch of problems going on in the future. So that's these slides over natural selection. This video is to help you guys review the slides, or whatever you need. Feel free to watch it. I'll post it on the classroom, of course, and email me with questions and we'll continue on. So thank you guys for hanging out with me.